You don't have to fundamentally change your leadership team structure and operating rhythm, but just being out there doing that work can be hugely symbolic, and it can be a learning moment, and it can really charge your teams, customers, vendors to actually go forward and come up with that good idea or call stop if we're acting outside of our cultural strategy.
My name is Buddy Teaster, President and CEO of Souls for Souls and host of the Repurpose podcast. Each episode offers candid conversations with business leaders and entrepreneurs who share the ups and downs, wins and challenges they faced along the way, and how they learned to overcome them. These are real stories of real people going from tailspin to tailwind, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Good morning. I am super excited to welcome Dane Groenveld to the Repurpose podcast. I had a chance to be a guest on his show a few months ago and learned a lot. We've worked with his company at Souls for Souls. So we have all these connections, and now we get to flip it around and I get to ask him some questions about his professional life. He's been an entrepreneur, a hired gun, private equity. He's done all these interesting things, and his focus now is on the future of teamwork. That's a big thing that Dane's going to talk with us about, because I think it's maybe as important as ever to talk about what that means in this era of hybrid and remote and the increasing value of being face-to-face. So I just want to talk about all those things and your journey along the way, Dane. So long intro, but thanks for joining us.
Thanks, buddy. I'm stoked to be here.
Great. Well, maybe you could give a little background. I hit not even a millimeter deep on all the things that you've done.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to start with childhood, because I've found the more I've worked in this space around people and teams that the form of our childhood and who we are naturally tends to kind of lead into the careers that we can excel and find energy in. So I grew up in the mining industry. My dad was working for a large mining company. I moved around a bunch of towns. I think I had 8 schools by the time I was 15. So I was kind of the guy that would run around and find people in any new community or park and like gather them and play games together. That's kind of me. And funnily enough, now that I reflect back on like 9-year-old, 10-year-old Dane, I've been doing a lot of that in my career. Not always intentionally, but it's just kind of been a natural style. So I did not follow my father into the engineering and mining profession. I found a job in a bar as a recruiter when I was at university, and spent 20-something years recruiting teams to build large oil and gas projects, primarily some civil infrastructure, some mining, but building big stuff, often in odd corners of the world, new locations, under snow, in the jungles, in the desert. So I got to work with an amazing ecosystem of people and companies that were making these huge things happen, building pipelines, building gas plants, building platforms, and building communities around those businesses. Because when you build an oil and gas operation, you need to be able to have people around it to sustain it and to maintain it. And often you're building it near people and you need to engage with the communities. So I went through that growth cycle as an individual, and I got to work on some great businesses, private equity owned businesses that were scaling primarily organically. At one stage, I think we had 8,000 employees in 70 different countries.
Wow.
So we got to see a lot. And then when the oil price started to tank, I got sent out to buy businesses. So I realized that recruiting talent and then recruiting business owners who might want to think about the next chapter, there's a lot of similarities there. You're still convening people to play different games. So I started doing the M&A, and I joined a family-owned business back in 2018, which was PTS. So staffing business started by Ron Stein in 95. His 2 sons helped him build it. And that was a magic moment for me. My dad said, if you can go and work with a family-owned business and take it through an evolution, then that's something real to show. And there's going to be a lot more of that in the future. You think about all the boomer-owned businesses and even Gen X-owned businesses that are going to be transitioning. And the Stein family were awesome. We took that business, we quadrupled it in size through some acquisition and through some organic growth, again, probably 50-50. And we just sold that this year to a big platform in the UK, Mawson, another family-owned business, interestingly. So there's some DNA continuity. And so that's kind of what brings me to where I'm at today, which is over the last couple of years, I've been spending a lot of time on the Future of Teamwork podcast. We acquired an HR consulting firm called Inspira, which now operates as Leader. So that's kind of my day job, my CEO job. And we also have a small technology platform that small and mighty that helps companies find and onboard talent. So I'm really playing in that sphere of how do you build teams? How do you then kind of set them up for success across a number of industries?
As an outsider, don't really understand the engineering world that you've been around or in as a kid or as a professional early on, it doesn't seem automatic to me that that is a team community kind of feeling. It seems like big projects, pretty technical, and yet you've used the word community and team a lot in talking about those. Can you, like, how does that show up when it doesn't feel like that's the starting place?
Well, there's a bias there, right? Because growing up in Australia, a lot of mining towns were truly mining towns. The township came up around the coal mine or the gold mine or the copper mine. And most people in the business, most people in the town were either working on the mine site or for a company that served the mine site or for a restaurant that fed people who worked in and around that community. So in those early years growing up, we would go to holiday parties, like a big Christmas party, and the local mine would rent out the town hall. They'd do dances, they'd do gifts for every age group. You go in, it'd be like, I'm in the 7 to 11 category. I get to go and get a cricket bat. And so there was just a lot of community. So I've got a bias that was my early experience. I think to your point, as we've gone on and grown and become more global and been able to build in remote areas, you are seeing more camps. You are seeing more fly in, fly out, or travel in and out of these engineering locations. And some of that community township vibe has shifted. But it pops up. So it will pop up in the camp environment when you're in construction, or it will pop up when you send a team of people to work in Indonesia or Malaysia or China to build the modules before they ship for construction. So what I've found through time is that the best teams, the ones who can drive good safety, good quality, good budget management, they tend to be teams that come together for more than just the work. They've worked together before. Maybe they worked in Azerbaijan and then they turned up in Papua New Guinea and then they follow across to Qatar. And so there is this kind of community of sorts. It's kind of on demand or pop up rather than the more traditional geographically positioned community, and it's powerful.
So these projects are global, the teams are global, and yet you're going to show up in China or Papua New Guinea or Azerbaijan where you're in a place that is super local, right? There's a real culture that you're coming into. So when you talk about teamwork, like, how is that conscious? Are you thinking about the countries that you're bringing people from and showing up to, or does that, like, hey, I get the best people and they got to figure it out?
No, it's a great question, buddy. I've seen the I've got the best people and they figure out model, and it rarely works because intentionality is very important. So I've seen the best project teams come together and they're looking for that chemistry of the team that they're convening from wherever they come from in the world. So they are looking for the right talent for the job. But then they're also doing a lot of cultural sensitivity and awareness work before mobilization and while on the ground. One of the great projects I worked on in Papua New Guinea used to have a group called SELCA, which I believe was an acronym for Social, Economic, Landholder and Community Affairs. So they were actually working very much in the community to go out and do kind of like what you guys do at Souls for Souls, go and do more like economic development in the community, work out who the entrepreneurs were, what were the local families that might be able to stand up a laundromat and wash uniforms for the site, or a logistics service to drive equipment on and off, or a tree clearing service, or whatever it might be. And I found that those project teams that came in knowing the technicalities of the project, but also the community that they were going to be embedded in, and where they built some of those bridges or threads, they tended to do far better. They learned a lot from the local population, And they also had a greater sense of like mattering and purpose. We're not just here to build a great thing that produces a product for people over an ocean. We're here to build an organization, a facility that's going to be part of this country or this region's economic development.
So Dane, if I understand your timeline right, that a lot of that was recruiting, and then you moved in later to Inspire a Leader, which is, how we first connected, where you're much more consciously helping build the team and help develop. How do those two things fit together? And like, what did you bring from your recruiting experience into Leader?
Yeah, it's a good question. So early days recruiting was just find the right talent. But over time, we were managing, 8,000 employees in 70 countries. So it became important that you knew not just what talent to put on the job, but who was going to last in that role, because they were our employees, and who was going to be safe and who was going to grow in that role, because that was of economic benefit to us as a large staffing platform. But it also was interesting to me personally. I had more fun working with people who I could build teams around, where I knew, hey, if I'm going to go and put someone to work for Justin over on the safety team, I know Justin runs a great team. I know he's really engaged with the local community. I can actively recruit for him, and I'm learning from him by osmosis. So I think it was that early experience in my recruitment career. It was kind of like my formulas for success there in building those companies that made me interested in starting the podcast. It made me interested in Kurt's business when we bought Inspire and folded into Leader, because I realized when you're spending billions of dollars in building projects in these new communities, you've got a lot of resource and brains trust to call on to do some of this work. But when you're running a small team or a small business, sometimes that's overlooked.
Yeah.
Or a division of a business in a larger company. So maybe I could bring some of those observed learnings from how you build big stuff in new environments into how you build smaller stuff in different environments. So I think there was a bit of a theme there.
I was going to ask that question later, but here's the right time, I think. 8,000 people, 70 countries. I don't know where you are now, but Leader's not that. Like, it's a smaller company with a different set of resources. How do you not get frustrated? How do you take advantage of the things that are, I'll put in quotes, better about a smaller organization? Like, how do you rationalize those two pretty different experiences?
I do get frustrated, and I'm still working on that. So we can park that for a second. There's something about working for a big business when you've got a lot of resource to bear and you've got professionals in every function that you can kind of say, we're going to go and do this, and it happens. Where in a smaller business, as you've put in the book and as you've seen with your organization, you need to create so much more time and intentionality around like clarity and purpose and what resources we're going to create to achieve things. And you need to bring a lot more people along on that journey, because most people are double hatting, right?
Yeah.
So I find that really interesting. On one hand, it is a challenge and it can be frustrating, well, particularly when as leaders we get it wrong and we try and move too fast, which is one of my general sense of urgency also has a shadow side for me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a brilliance to it. And one of the things that I found working with my smaller teams is we can collaborate a lot more. There's less silos. You can actually learn from the fringes of the organization and actually build better outcomes, products, experiences, because there's something about a small team that is willing to kind of double hat. That just brings an energy and a fabric into the work that you do, and that's actually something that I'm still a student of. And I think there's a small part of me that believes in the future, particularly as we see more AI, more distributed work, that it will be the teams that are the unit of measure. Even in a large organization, it's how those smaller teams work together and create things, and then connect with other teams that's going to create the climate for culture building, culture reinforcement, innovation, you name it. I think a lot more is going to come from that unit of the team.
When you talk about the unit of a team, you hear different, like that's 20 people, you can remember 150 names. There are all these different ways of thinking about what that unit is. How do you have a chance to build that and execute it in your organization, and you're going to go into other bigger companies and provide them guidance. So how are you thinking about AI and remote, all those things, and saying, but the team is the unit of what?
Yes. Well, we ran a Healthy Team Summit in Boston in October, so just last month. It feels a lot longer ago. And what we found there, we actually surveyed about 100 people in the room, and we identified that teaming is much more dynamic than the people I work with and report to on a daily basis. So in the workplace, most people are now saying that they would attach themselves to between 5 and 7 teams in the workplace. So that team might be, hey, we're responsible for leading the summit event next year, so we're a project team. Or that team might be, we're responsible for onboarding new employees into our organization. Or the team could be, we're the accounting and finance team, and we do all of the general accounting and bookkeeping. But you can be on these different teams, and your role on a team can be very different. The team's objectives can be very different. So the way I am, and then there's your teams outside of work. I coach the rugby club, my family, however you want to define that.
Right.
So the way I look at the team as a unit of measure right now is quite simply on 2 factors. One is, does the team have a clear objective? And are those team members connecting in a particular way to achieve the objective? Everyone's going to have different ways of connecting, different resources, online, virtual, in person. But if they have a shared objective and they're connecting to do the work, I would say that's a team. If they don't have a shared objective, if they're just coming together to brainstorm around a problem and they're just, throwing a few things asynchronously at a Jamboard on Google, I wouldn't really call that a team. So that's kind of my definition for now.
So you used a word that I've not really heard, Dane, and that's teaming versus being on a team. So some of that I think you just described, but are you articulating that as a new way to think about, if you're on 5 to 7 teams, which my first reaction was like, well, that's not right. But then of course I think about it. Yeah, it is. So can you talk a little bit about that as a distinct way of thinking about being in an organization?
Yes. Yeah. I think what we've seen and continue to see, particularly with digitalization of our workplaces, and with people's integration of work and life, that different people are going to be bringing different strengths, different interests, be available at different times, have tools that they prefer to work on. And so the traditional 40-hour work week, coming back from the Industrial Revolution, hey, buddy, you've got that part of the process line. Dane, you've got that part of the process line. Go and do it 40 hours a week, has shifted materially. And therefore, teaming allows you to have your core work. This is who I report to. This is what 50, 70, 80% of my work revolves around. But then rather than just stuffing it full of other stuff, I think we can all now be a lot more intentional in our organizations around, how does Buddy's role on this team or Jenny's role on that team serve a customer? How does it serve an internal system development? How does it serve Buddy or Jenny's professional career aspirations or passions in the community? And so I think what we're starting to see, and I don't think the technology or the social practices have fully caught up with it, I think it's just happening and we're starting to wrangle it, is that teaming is very valuable. And the more intentional we are about teaming, I think we'll probably tackle that initial aversion that you shared, which I think is right. Like being on 7 teams seems scary if you have this monolithic view of the team, because you're like, well, who's in control? Who's setting the clarity? Who's doing the review? Who's setting the budget? And so it feels chaotic, but I think it is likely the way that we're going. And in fact, in some organizations, the horse is already bolted.
Right. So I'm going to go back to something that you talked a little bit about earlier, and to me seems relevant here. Even small organizations now are global. They're teams all over the world. They're customers. And so there's a increasingly valuable understanding of cultural competency. I don't know if that's the right phrase. Certainly sensitivity. I think that's the word you used. And if I'm a small organization, like I'll just take Souls for Souls, we have 85 employees. 25 or so are very place-based. They're in our distribution centers and our warehouses, and so they have to be where they are. The rest of us could be anywhere. And so if you say we've got 50 people, we're in 7 or 8 countries, 20 states here in the U.S., and this understanding of not just time zones and the logistics of that, but how do I speak to a Dutch person or a French person or a Canadian? They're all different. So how does the teaming, and I'm on 7 of them, and now I've got exponentially more exposure to that, not make me want to jump out a window?
Yeah, I think it does make some people jump out of a window, sadly. Now, hopefully they're not jumping, but they feel that way.
Maybe just first floor, that's all. We don't have to go far.
Yeah, that's right. Particularly when it's not well managed. And we've got to think very carefully when we're constructing those teams, which often we don't, about what is that person's aptitude, comfort level, energy around being on that team or working in that way. A good friend of mine, Dr. Andre Martin, wrote a book called Wrong Fit, Right Fit. And it's all about we need to spend more time being intentional about how we like to work, because that actually drives your energy. And if we're not being cognizant of that energy, then we're going to create burnout. We're going to create cultural, challenge and fragmentation. And we're not going to create good products or services. I think that's a starting point, is like kind of know who and where your team are at as you're putting those teams together. However, often you'll find the flip side is also true. Someone might be highly energized by the opportunity to work across 5 teams, and you might be draining their energy by giving them a very straightforward 9-to-5 job. So there's both hidden opportunity in your team and risk in how you put it together. But moving on from that to the how that we work, what I'm learning is that if you, and the AI is actually starting to help as much as it's hindering, if you can put the right team together and you can create some very basic work agreements. This is when we do our meetings, because we've got East Coast, West Coast, or continental US, continental Europe. When we do our work, how we share our information, how we review work, how we give feedback. If you can create some, a playbook of sorts, it doesn't have to be a deep organizational program, then I think you can set teams up for a lot of success. And a tip for any listeners out there that want to play with any of that stuff, Atlassian is one of, I'm biased again,
another Australian company.
But Atlassian have some really cool team playbooks on their website that's free to deal with just that. And actually, I like some of their tools like Loom for video that allow you to do asynchronous work. So that's a good example of where like the AI and the technology and some of the platforms that are out there are giving us tooling to do some of this work better.
Dane, so far we've talked a lot about being on that team, but you definitely just made clear that that isn't always thought through very well, which is the leader's job, right? Not just your company, but the person. So given your bias that this is what you do for a living, this is what you think about, but it seems like that becomes as important as almost any other function of a leader, is to think about how to put together the team and help them come up with their charter, if that's the right word.
Yeah, I think in a big way. We had Gary Ridge, the chairman emeritus from WD-40, another Australian. I got to stop calling these guys out. He came to our Healthy Team Summit, and he kind of closed the day with his talk about the culture he built at WD-40. And what I loved about what Gary shared was he built very clear values that were hierarchical, that help people make decisions. And he changed the word manager to coach. So what you just said there, Buddy, really excites me. It's like the role of a leader in picking who's on the team and being clear about their role and how they play in different moments is becoming far more important than the role of a leader in having knowledge to disperse in the technical sense of work that we've traditionally done. So I do think we're going to see that leaders of teams become far more like a sports coach, where they're not out on the field playing, and that they are sitting here working with the general manager to look at what talent's coming available off different projects from different organizations, how talent on the field is playing, what the competitive landscape is. And I think that is going to be a growing need. We're still going to need leaders who are very technically competent and do certain roles, but I think we're going to see more and more of that as we go forward. And as AI, if anything, fragments and confuses the work that a lot of our people are doing in the near term.
My guess is you work with all levels of organization, right down to this is, I think, a South African phrase, at the coal face. Maybe it's an Australian phrase, to the CEO. But let's go to the CEO level for just a second.
Yeah.
We have an executive team at Souls for Souls. That's not a fluid group. There are 5 of us. That's the team. Yeah. And yet what you're just saying is making me think, well, what am I missing by limiting it that way? Or how do we leverage this pretty healthy, dynamic group with a lot of trust to think a little differently? I mean, I'm not a big sports guy, but what if you did think about like a draft? Like, I've got people in the pool here and I want this one, and I don't need somebody who's a linebacker or a fullback or whatever your rugby positions are.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine getting to something that is a lot more dynamic like that?
I hope to see that. I hope to see that not just in organizations. I love that you're joining those dots, Buddy, but I hope to see it outside of organizations. And you're already doing it. I love the story when you joined me on my podcast about how you're working with your partners in different countries to create different economic models, business models, community impact. So you guys are already doing it outside of your organization in a more fluid way than you may be inside. And I think that's true of a lot of companies when they think about their ecosystem. But as we start to think about what is possible, that kind of what I came into my early career with, which was a very fear-based, like competitive-driven mindset around, supply chain and competitors and even fellow team members who are often competing for the same promotion, I think is going to open up. I think we're going to see a lot more collaboration and innovation as teams think more fluidly about who they can grab for what particular, assignment, project, experience, moment. And I think we're going to need some technology and some frameworks to help us get through that. But distributed leadership and participation of a wider cross-section of our team members, board members, customers, vendors is absolutely a healthy field to be out harvesting right now.
Keep pushing on the CEO role for a second, or the leader. I mean, it could be of a division. How do you want him or her to be thinking about this? Like you said, if I've got my core team, and that's not going to be, I'm not trading people in and out. No. Like, how do you balance that sort of static, high trust group, hopefully, with more fluidity and dynamism underneath that? That seems to be a little at cross purposes almost.
It is at cross purposes. So one of the frameworks that I've been working on from a lot of our research, we've had about 170 guests on the podcast, is what I call the show method. And I think leadership teams, particularly intact leadership teams, can benefit from this acronym 4 things. So one is having a really good story or strategy, depending on how you frame that. And if you've got that, it's a framework within which your suppliers, customers, team members can start to see things that you may not be seeing and share them up and understand why we're doing things. So story is a big one. Health is another big one, which we can talk to all day long. It's both the individual health and team health. But outside influence, which is the O of show, and work, which is the W, are the 2 areas where I think that intact leadership team can really be flexing its muscle. Because if the story and the health are right, then the outside influence is maybe one of those intact executive team members is going out and participating in a Vistage chapter or a YPO chapter or an EO chapter, or maybe they're just locally working with the Chamber of Commerce, or maybe they're going on missions with, one of your customers or people in that function to serve a purpose. I think getting that outside influence and perspective in a time of so much change is an important way that they can still have their day job, but see things and become inspired about what may change in the organization. And then on the work, very specifically, I call out a piece of work, which is, where are you doing work outside of the executive suite, the old-fashioned corner office? Like, where do you get down on the floor in the warehouse, or where do you go out with a vendor or a downstream customer to see how this flows? And I think when you select that work intentionally, based on, the story of the business and how you're looking at health across the organization, how you're observing outside influence, if you pick that work, it might only need to be, 3 or 4 hours a month. You don't have to fundamentally change your leadership team structure and operating rhythm, but just being out there doing that work can be hugely symbolic, and it can be a learning moment, and it can really charge your teams, customers, vendors to actually go forward and come up with that good idea, or call stop if we're acting outside of our cultural strategy.
Yeah. That is, I think, such a smart thing, and we're living it right now. And, things are tough. It's a tough environment. The economy's hard, tariffs, all these things. And I feel sometimes like we're pulling back. And yet when we get out and talk to people, customers, partners, whatever, you're like, oh, this is right, this is wrong, this is an opportunity, this is a risk that you can't do from the sitting at your thing talking on Zoom.
Yep. And pulling back, like for any leaders out there that are listening, you're going to see more pulling back. You're going to feel like you need to because it's stressful, and it's an anxiety-fueled world right now. I think we're in one of our highest peaks of anxiety ever. And when, as humans, we feel that anxiety and fear, we seek safety in what is known and concrete. So often that's spreadsheets, often that's going back and doing an inventory stock take, or going back and looking at old data of what customers used to buy. But actually you need to be thinking forward, and you need to be getting outside, because if your teams all put their heads down in the old work and the heavy work, number one, that's easier for your competitors to beat you on in AI. But number two, it's not good energy for them. So it's going to deteriorate health. And number three, you're going to miss all those opportunities.
Yeah. Well, let's go to health a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'll focus on personal. So I know you're a surfer. When we did our podcast here the first time, there were surfboards behind you, and it's clearly a part of who you are. And then
There's a ton outside in this new office too.
So it's interesting to me. I was thinking about it this morning with knowing that we're going to talk. That seems to be, I'm an ultra runner, and that looks like a solitary sport, and it's not. There's a team, right? You have friends and family and volunteers. And so because surfing looks like the ultimate individual sport. I mean, you are highlighted out there on the board by yourself. And here's a guy who's focused on the future of teamwork, who has this, at least one important outlet that is the opposite of that. My guess is I don't have the right end of the telescope, but can you talk about how those things work together in addition to the health piece?
Well, I mean, my very nature, I love to be out in the world. I think it's important for humans in general. I think we've become so detached from the physical world that we live in that's driving some of the problems. So whether it's out sailing, skiing, surfing, anything without a motor is always good for me. Running, walking.
Yeah.
And surfing's been something that I've always found interesting because I like chaos. I like movement. I don't like sitting still. So with surfing, unlike skiing, in skiing you see the mountain, you kind of know what's coming. In surfing, that wave's constantly changing, even if you surf the same break. And so I love that element of it, that I'm able to kind of ride that energy and make guesses and make mistakes and learn and get a super high if I get it right.
And slam to the bottom if you get it wrong.
Yeah, you do get, and the older I get, the more that hurts. But yeah, that's really important. And so I find that's helpful. I also find that going back to teamwork, like you can't always be teaming and doing teamwork. So for me, I recharge my batteries by getting time out there on my own. And I'm not the most chatty person in the lineup. I'm focused on catching my waves and getting back to my family or to my work and staying busy, getting a workout. Here in California, you see a lot of guys that just go and sit out there on the board and talk because they escaped the office or home. But I'm more of a stay busy guy out there.
So look, you're at a point in your life where you have, I'm guessing, a lot of flexibility about how to do surf's up, tide's right, whatever those things are. How do you encourage people who don't have that flexibility? I mean, they might not be doing the 40-hour-a-week kind of thing, but they're still, they feel constrained by that. How do you get them to be outside and to do the things that I agree are super important without a motor? without it seeming like this trade-off of then I can't spend time with my family, or I can't do this, I can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I think leaders create the safety and the conditions for that heavily. So leaders, as part of my model, the show method, I think have to actively show that they're investing time in it. Because if we say, as a CEO, hey, you guys need to make sure you take time to walk your dog or go and help run a kid's training or, go for a jog in the morning. And if we don't do it, that's very visibly at odds. There's dissonance, and they're going to be like, I can't, they're just saying that to keep me happy. But if I do it, I'm going to lose the promotion opportunity or the job. So I think leaders need to show an active example of doing it, number one. And then number two, I think individuals have to be selfish and impatient, which isn't what most leaders want to hear. But the reality is, if you're not, it's only going to impact your ability to perform over time anyway. So I'm actually kind of at a point in time in my life, maybe through privilege, where I'm like, I want to attack this whole concept of a high-performing team, because I think it's a lot of BS. I think a lot of high-performing teams leave a trail of human wreckage because they're all focused on outputs and not necessarily on outcomes. And so I think leaders out there who can really encourage their team members to be impatient, to advocate for what's important to them and what time of the day. Now's a good time to do it. We've learned through COVID that we can work around some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And even if you've got someone working in a warehouse or a oil and gas refinery or wherever it is, there's ways for you to make that possible. You can think differently about shift scheduling, because it doesn't have to be a daily practice. In Australia, in the mining industry, we used to do a lot of rostered days off, which was, every other Friday for some businesses. It would be like, we're going to have a few more people on staff and carry you through. So that'll be your rostered day off. Or we're just going to shut the job site down for a day and let everyone go and fish or hunt or go for a walk or whatever. So I think you need to be designing the work and the projects with some of that slack. I think slack is something that we haven't created enough of in teams.
Yeah. Seth Godin writes a lot about slack being a resource. It's seen often as a negative on your balance sheet if you've got slack instead of an asset. And that's an interesting way to think about it, right? If everything goes right to the 99th percentile, if one thing goes wrong, it's sort of a catastrophic cascade instead of if you're at 95% or 90%, you've got room to absorb.
100%. In fact, talking about balance sheet assets and liabilities, here in the US, we're not very good at taking our PTO. Yeah. And a lot of people bank PTO as cash for a rainy day, which is a disaster. I know it's necessary. This is a tough world to live in if you don't have a job. But we've got people who are just banking PTO and not taking their time off.
Yeah.
And so there's a perfect example of where you've got to be like, if I've got a big accrual on the balance sheet of PTO, that tells me that there's not enough slack in my organization. It tells me that we're brittle. It tells me we might break when the real tough stuff hits us. And I need to be thinking about how I encourage my teams and actually go beyond encouragement and actually make space for them to be able to go away and to breathe and to kind of do that recovery work, because it's you see it in every team now. I mean, and as I get a little bit older and wiser, I see where I've kind of burnt myself out through my career and realize when I look back, I can spot those moments and go, gee, I made a terrible decision there.
Yeah.
And it's because I was running so hot into that finish line and look at that outcome.
What's happening with people seems to be way more interesting right now than what's happening with the economy or the stock market or whatever.
I agree.
And I think privilege is a good word, but you see behind the scenes when nobody's giving you the bullshit of like, it's all great and we're going to be up 10%, and underneath, know, this thing is about to go upside down, or the leader can't get to whatever those things are. Can you talk a little bit about how you think 3 years from now we're going to be talking about this idea of being on a team and teaming?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of pain coming as far as AI disruption, and not just because it replaces jobs. I think AI actually breaks the way that we work as humans if it's not implemented right. So there's a lot of pain coming, and I think people are going to be forced to be thinking about the unit of a team, just for survival, but also for for actually realizing potential. So it's going to come from both parts, and I think different people are going to find it at different times. But if we really think about the unit of the team and we get clear about what the work is, how their work feeds into the wider corporate organizational mission, and how we're sending people, to quote Gary Ridge, people home happy at the end of the day to have good family lives, good community community participation. It's those leaders that are investing that time in that over the next few years are going to see that their teams are far more capable of navigating changing markets, changing times, because we're going to be in changing markets, changing times. That's a constant, and it's going to be accelerating. So I think it's really important that those leaders are thinking outside of their organizational sphere, outside of their existing strategy, and really saying, well, what's happening in each team, and how are we setting them up to perform on a sustainable basis? Because I'm not saying go and make everyone happy and healthy. Like, we've got to make profit, otherwise we're not going to be here. But I think that's going to be a reality. And what I hope to see as a result of that is that the winning teams, the leaders who take the right mentality, they win the customers. They have the better supply chain relationships. They have the better community license to operate. And those organizations over time start to perform really well, profit and loss balance sheet. But they've got a lot of following, and people want to go and work there, and people are learning from them. The more that our big companies and successful companies, even when they're small, can spread good practices through their teams, that'll flow down to the local rugby club. That'll flow down to the local religious institution, the food bank. So I see a really positive landscape if we focus on that unit.
I read the Daily Stoic every day. That's why it's called the Daily Stoic. And this month is all about change. And it's just remarkable, as you said, we live in unprecedented times. Well, you flip back 2,000 years and the guy's like, no.
No.
It's the same stuff. It's just a kind of a different coat of paint on the same issue of how much is changing, how fast, what does it mean for us, and what we can control. Our questions have been around a long time.
Long time.
Long time. So I do want to ask the last question, because you're at an interesting point. Like, you've had all this success. You've learned a lot. You've lived around and worked around the world. I think you have still young kids at home. Yeah. And the question that I like to ask at the end is not where do you want to be in 20 years, but 20 years from now, when you're however old you'll be then, and you look back and think about this moment with you moving into a new office, you have this new business. What do you want to remember about right now in 20 years?
Personally, I want to remember that I shook off the chains of fear and realized that I can actually take some time for myself and for my family. I've got a 6-month-old now, so I really got to put the time in there. And it's an important stage to be managing health, in the middle of our lives, so that we've got the longevity. So I want to make sure, that I get my personal health and family right. And then the other one is community. I really want to know that at this point in time, when I look back in 20 years, I started something. I started a movement. I started building a community. I started doing things in ways that other people can take and do for themselves, that is actually going to solve some of this whole loneliness epidemic, connection, misery at work, anxious generation, because that's what I worry about most for my kids and my grandkids. I don't want people to be living through some of the stuff that we've artificially created in the last 20 or 30 years, that only compounds the change that's always going to be there, going back to the Stoic thinking. So if I can help create just a little less misery and a little bit more opportunity through community, that would be awesome.
Good. Dane, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been a real pleasure. I really want to encourage folks who are interested in more about what Dane has to say on these topics. His podcast, Future of Teamwork, is excellent. So highly recommend that. As you can hear, this guy's thought a lot about it. So Dane, thanks for joining us, and I look forward to the next time we get a chance to speak.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. I love the work that you're doing, and it's always great to just riff and learn from the conversation.
Thanks for joining us on the Repurpose Podcast with me, Buddy Teaster. You can follow this show at buddyteaster.com/podcast, and you can learn more about what we do at s4s.org. If you like this content, please share, rate, and review our episodes wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And until next time, I ask you to ask yourself, what's your why? And how will discovering that help give your life a repurpose?